Okay, so let's talk about sales metrics and the factors that influence them. And so I want to refer you to an ebook that you can download. I'll make a link to this in the resources section of this particular lecture. And I'm sitting at my desk here where I record some of these screen demos. And at the front end of this particular course for the Sales Cloud Consultant, this is going to be a little bit different in that there's a lot of conceptual information that has to be presented to you. And so I'm going to try and mix this up a little bit and intersperse myself on camera as well as what I'm recording on the screen and try this out. I didn't want you just staring at a non-moving screen while I pontificate on the intricacies of this particular certification and things around like KPIs and sales metrics and those sorts of scenarios. And so in this particular ebook that's downloadable from Salesforce, they talk to several different thought leaders in the sales space around what they use in order to influence and what would be key factors for sales metrics. And so we're going to talk for a few minutes about different sales metrics and then the idea behind what can drive desired results in a sales cycle. Now, some of you may already know a lot of this information if you come from a sales consulting background. This information is more geared towards those that are newer to Salesforce and maybe have been an administrator. And if you're in this course, then you've got to have the administrator certification. But now it's time to move beyond configuring access and creating user accounts and creating reports or dashboards into more strategic roles for sales professionals. And so as you're in a consulting role, you're going to be a liaison between technical staff for your own company and then for clients that you're consulting with, how to solve the problems that they're facing. And so some of these problems, specifically with the Sales Cloud, is how to drive more sales. And so the metrics that matter, at least to these thought leaders in this book, and I'll scroll here through some of this to show you what this is about. In the front end, it talks about some of the people that they talk to for this ebook, and this is a panel of experts from Ireland and the UK, actually. And so this gives more of a global flavor, even though this probably relates as well for US companies. But I felt like this was a good resource to start understanding what drives people in the sales realm. For myself, it took me quite some time to kind of understand and attain the knowledge that I needed in order to make sense of how Salesforce is adequately used. I came at it from a developer standpoint and learned how to do things through clicks and through code on the platform. And then it was, several years into my learning journey and certification journey that I realized I really didn't understand how Salesforce is used by end users. And so I felt like in order for you to leapfrog in your career path and your learning path to become a consultant, it would be helpful to understand some of this information. And so in this first section, here's the part about meet the metrics devotees, and here they are. And I won't, read all this to you here. I'll leave that to you to investigate further who these particular experts are. I will point out that one of these is someone from Salesforce. And then here's three more. So total of 6 people, and just asking their opinion on some things. This chapter guide, the things that really I want to focus on for this particular lecture as it relates to metrics that matter and sales metrics that matter and the factors that influence them, is this chapter 2, where they talk about which metrics motivate reps the most. And then as well, this chapter 5, sales critical metrics, the ones that got away. And you'll see here as well that there's a lot around dashboards. The way that you convey metrics effectively or analytics in Salesforce is through dashboards and reports. So on the analytics side, you'll be familiar with that some if you've been administering on the platform. You may be familiar with creating effective dashboards. And so now, as you start to go deeper into this particular course, you'll begin to find out what are the metrics that motivate salespeople. And if you have that understanding, that will serve you well in a consultancy role on the Sales Cloud. And so there's a little bit of talk here of metrics and dashboards that give you an edge. And so some of these takeaways that these thought leaders share are, some of the obvious things would be like deploying dashboards or leaderboards. And, salespeople are very competitive. And so ways that you can encourage people really pushing forward and closing more deals is having leaderboards and showing how you're doing compared to your peers if you're a sales professional. And then other things that you look for, profitability and revenue. Those are key sales metrics that you'll want to be able to establish on the Salesforce platform. And so as I scroll through here into this chapter 2 that I mentioned previously, it says which metrics motivate reps the most. And so they ask each of these 6 people, what are the metrics that matter the most to end users that you're going to be setting up solutions on the Salesforce platform for, and how this all relates on the certification exam. You might be wondering at this point, well, I just want to pass the certification exam. There is a certain level of knowledge, industry, and background that you need to have in order to pass the certification exam. Some of the scenario-based questions will go into concepts such as these, and so I want you to have some sort of background and familiarity with typical consulting roles in a Sales Cloud capacity, so that when you are broached with these topics in your exam, you won't be just taken by surprise. And so in the first section of the exam, and the section that we're in here has to do with industry knowledge. And so just as a reminder, I want to read the bullet points from the exam guide, in that there's just 2 bullet points. It's weighted a very small percentage in the exam, but it's very important that you understand these things. And so those 2 bullet points are that you need to be able to explain the factors that influence sales metrics, KPIs, and business challenges. And then as well, you need to be able to explain common sales processes and key considerations. And so in that first bullet about being able to explain the factors that influence sales metrics, that is what I'm talking about now. And so some of those metrics that these sales professionals look for, that they want to be able to measure inside of Salesforce, would be profitability and revenue. And that's the dollars and cents that I mentioned as far as revenue of opportunities, for example. And then another thing that one of these individuals mentioned that I thought was interesting was the number of units sold. And so, some companies look more at just strictly dollars or profit margin. Others are looking at just acquiring more customers and more interested in volume of sales rather than revenue of sales. And so I'm, even myself in teaching online courses, I do have an interest and a motivation to be able to, provide for my family by teaching these courses and selling enough in order to be successful and do this as a full-time job rather than just as a side hustle. But also, I'm looking at the number of students. And so just part of this is just acquiring a larger audience. Part of my vision statement on my website is to inspire, equip, and train the masses on the Salesforce platform. And so, my stated vision and goal is to reach the masses and not some small little niche community. And so that even drives my decision-making process behind what I price my courses at. I tend to price my courses pretty low in order to attract a larger audience rather than charging a premium. And so some companies do the same. You have companies that look for trying to make just a few sales of large amounts, and there's others that look for making thousands of sales for a small amount. And so that is something that can be customized, of course, on the platform. And so those are key metrics that you'll be asked to think about as you're consulting on the platform and trying to provide solutions in the Sales Cloud. So continuing on here, that chapter 5 that I wanted to look at, and we'll skip over this stuff about dashboards for now. We'll look at dashboards later in this course, but for now, when we're just looking at metrics, these sales critical metrics, the ones that got away, they ask the question, with so much data available, it's easy to overlook crucial information that could make a huge difference to sales performance. What types of metrics should sales leaders measure but often don't? Very good question. So we've got different responses from these different individuals. And so what they will speak to, and I'll just leave this at a very high level because I've gone on long enough and leave you to read this and discover for yourself. But some of these things that you can look at and some of these factors that affect sales metrics either positively or negatively are things such as the frequency of contact with your leads or your contacts inside of accounts. Your sales reps need to be being quick to follow up on things. And so effective activity management inside of Salesforce is very critical, and scheduling follow-up calls or meetings or executive meetings. Those are the sort of actions that you can set up and manage in Salesforce and look at historically in the past and start to find what are the key patterns that lead to a successful deal and what can lead to time to closure. And so some of those other metrics would be close rates, conversion rates, and that would be based on the number of opportunities that a sales rep is working, what percentage do they end up closing the deal on. And so if you think back that some people are really good at generating new opportunities, they may be effective on the marketing side of things and getting a lot of leads into a marketing funnel, but then there may be some sales reps that can't close very well. And so that's where you get into this leaderboard concept where you've got different percentages for conversion rates or close rates for different sales reps. And so there's a lot of good information here, and I want you early in the course here to start thinking about how you might reflect that in your own Salesforce instance if you're employed currently as an administrator, or if you're volunteering for a nonprofit, or if you're building something for yourself. Start to think about the way that Salesforce is structured as far as accounts and contacts and opportunities, and then how you can start to put together metrics of your own in order to measure results. And that will serve you well in meetings with decision makers and executives in a consulting role when you're being tasked with coming up with solutions to meet the desired goals that you've been contracted to do, or you've been hired to do if you're an employee of a company. And so some of those things will be being able to reduce the sales cycle, to take a typical sales cycle from like 9 months down to 6, for instance, in order to close deals more rapidly. Other things would be effectively upselling whenever there's a deal that closes, effectively selling additional services or products so that the average ticket for an order increases. So that would be a metric that someone might want to do, is have the average checkout price if it was business to consumer, or the average revenue of a business to business opportunity to see that increase. I've seen scenarios where I've worked on projects where we tried to guide the selling habits of the sales reps into more profitable call centers. For example, I worked for a large global company that managed call centers all over the globe, and certain call centers had more capacity and also provided greater profitability. And so presenting the proper solution that makes the most sense from a profitability standpoint, these are the sorts of things that you can build onto the system and then equip your sales reps in order to make more profitable decision making, rather than just trying to close a deal and gain a commission, doing something that is profitable for the company as well. And so you can bake all that into Salesforce through the customization of the platform. So you'll need to become familiar with the various acronyms and jargon related to sales. And I've bandied about KPIs, and that's in the next lecture actually, and that's key performance indicators. And so we're going to dive deeper into some of those key performance indicators now that can be set up in Salesforce, and that you'll need to be familiar with in order to do well on the exam. And not only that, the end goal of all these trainings that I do is not only to help you pass the certification exam, but to succeed ultimately in your role on the job as a consultant or administrator or whatever it is that you aspire to be. So stay tuned as we dive into some of these definitions and acronyms and start to make sense of it all as we dive deeper into the Sales Cloud certification.